In the cold, sterile quiet of the secure briefing room, the only sound was the low electric hum of the servers that held 1,000 secrets. On the main monitor before us, 2 digital signatures were displayed side by side in stark contrast. One glowed a steady, reassuring green, labeled authentic. The other was a furious, glaring red, a forgery. My uncle, Major Mark Hayden, a man who spent his life choking on the dust of my father's legacy, stood there looking like his bones had turned to ash inside his perfectly pressed uniform. Across from him stood my commanding officer, Commander Eva Rostova, a woman whose quiet intensity could silence a room without her ever raising her voice. Her words were low, cutting through the silence like a razor. "Major," she said calmly, "you tried to weaponize a hero's legacy against his own daughter. You have no idea who you just picked a fight with." Just 24 hours earlier, the atmosphere was tense in a much more familiar way. The suffocating quiet of a family dinner pretending to be normal. We were at the officers' club for my pre-deployment meal, a place of stiff tradition and forced smiles. I was seated between my mother, a woman who believed peace was more important than fairness, and my Uncle Mark. He always seemed to be performing, trying to project an authority he never truly earned, constantly measuring me against a ghost. It was the same old, tired story. The one where I was just a footnote in my own father's biography, a daughter, who could never fill the boots of a legendary son he never had. Commander Rostova joined our table then for a final courtesy check-in, her presence immediately shifting the balance of power. Mark saw his audience. He puffed out his chest, leaning back in his chair with a proprietary air as if he were the host of this charade. He smiled at my CO, a condescending, placating gesture that didn't reach his eyes. "I'm glad Maya has you looking out for her, Commander," he started, his voice dripping with false sincerity. "A signals intelligence role is safer." He let that word hang in the air, a deliberate poison meant just for me. Not exactly frontline material like her father, but we can't all be legends. The insult landed with a deafening thud in the silence. It wasn't just a dig at me. It was a flagrant dismissal of my commander's entire field, a deep violation of protocol that questioned her judgment in front of her own subordinate. I watched Rostova's eyes narrow just a fraction, the only outward sign of her anger. But inside me, something went perfectly still and cold. It was a familiar fury that settled deep in my gut, the same feeling I got when he lost the recommendation letter for my scholarship. The same tired ache from every holiday he spent telling stories about my father's bravery while ignoring my own achievements. This wasn't a new wound. It was just the final confirmation of an old one. He saw a girl playing a game, a pale imitation of a great man. He said it with a smug little smile, thinking he was just putting me in my place one more time. He had no idea he'd just questioned my operational capacity in front of the one person who signs off on my missions. To understand the reckoning that followed, you have to understand the ghost whose signature was about to be forged. My uncle saw a girl playing with computers. My command saw a weapon. For years, I kept those two worlds fiercely separate, sealed off from one another like classified documents. In one world, I was Lieutenant Maya Hayden, a ghost in the machine, a name, spoken with a quiet respect, in rooms my family couldn't imagine existed. In the other, I was just Maya, the quiet daughter of a hero, the niece of a pretender, a person whose actual life was a blurry, unimportant detail. To them, I was a pale reflection of my father, a constant, walking reminder of what they had lost and what my uncle never was. My father, Colonel Robert Hayden, was more than a soldier. He was a force of nature, a brilliant strategist who saw the world like a chessboard, always 10 moves ahead. His younger brother, my Uncle Mark, spent his entire life in that formidable shadow, perpetually, second best, and it steeped him in a bitterness he wore like a second skin. When my father was killed in action, The grief that should have united us instead created a vacuum. Mark stepped into it eagerly. He appointed himself the guardian of his brother's legacy, a role he performed with theatrical solemnity. He would talk about my father's honor, his strength, his sacrifice. But he never spoke of his intellect. It was the one area where my father was truly without peer, and the one area where I, too, excelled. And so, to my uncle, it simply didn't exist. I remember one sweltering summer afternoon, a family barbecue celebrating my cousin Kevin's acceptance into a standard ROTC program. My Uncle Mark stood on the patio, holding a beer like it was a scepter, and proposed a toast. He spoke of carrying on the family tradition, of the Hayden warrior spirit, and everyone cheered as Kevin beamed, his future suddenly so clear and celebrated. Just the week before, I had quietly graduated at the top of my class from a highly specialized NSA-sponsored cryptology program at Fort Meade. When I tried to mention it to my mother, she just smiled that tired, distant smile of hers. "Oh, that's nice, dear," she'd said, her eyes already scanning the yard for something else to focus on. My mother, a woman so hollowed out by grief she enabled my uncle's entire narrative, was the silent architect of my invisibility. She treated his condescension as a symptom of his own pain. "You know how your uncle is, Maya," she'd say, a phrase I'd heard 1,000 times. "He just misses your father so much. He's just trying to protect his legacy." What she meant was, "Don't make waves." What she meant was, "Your life is less important than his comfort." And so, at that barbecue, I didn't push it. I just watched my cousin get lauded for starting a race I had already finished, and I felt that familiar, heavy weight settle in my chest. The quiet, lonely weight of being seen, but never truly recognized. That was one world. The other was a world of absolute clarity. It was a world that existed in the tomb-like silence of a skiff, a sensitive compartmented information facility. It was a place, deep underground, with no windows and air that tasted like cold electricity, where your worth was measured in nothing but results. There, I wasn't the quiet niece. I was Ghost -7, a digital hunter in a Tier 1 signals intelligence unit. My partner in that world was my key ally, Warrant Officer Jax, a brilliant but deeply cynical tech genius who trusted my instincts more than he trusted regulations. He was a man of few words, but we had a shorthand born from 1,000 nights spent chasing digital shadows across the globe. Our work was a silent, high-stakes chess match. I remember one night. The tension in the skiff was so thick you could taste it. We were tracking a high-value target, the leader of a terrorist cell, but he had gone dark. His digital signature had vanished. The rest of the team saw a ghost, a dead end. But I saw a pattern. "Jax," I said, my voice low. "The signal's too clean. It's a decoy." I pointed to a flicker of encrypted data on a secondary satellite band, something everyone else had dismissed as background noise. "I need you to deep scan that sat phone's burst transmission. We're looking for a Hayden cipher, a backdoor encryption key my father developed before he died. He hid it in the military's core code. It's a ghost key. It's how we find him." Jax didn't question me. He just went to work, his fingers a blur across the keyboard. The room was silent except for the frantic clicking and the hum of the ventilation. Minutes felt like hours. Then he stopped. "Got him," he breathed out. "The cipher is there. I have his location." We had averted a catastrophic attack, saved dozens of lives. There was no parade, no toast, no celebration. The only acknowledgement was a simple, respectful nod from a 3-star general watching via a secure video link from the Pentagon. And in that single, quiet moment of recognition from a man who understood the stakes, I felt more seen than I ever had in my entire life under my family's roof. My family only respected the legacy of a dead man. But my father's legacy wasn't just in his medals, it was in the systems he built. And I was the only one left who had the master key. Back in the sterile silence of my quarters, the tension from dinner still clung to me like a bad odor. On my desk sat a single sealed manila envelope marked with a departmental seal. It was out of place, an anomaly in the tightly controlled pre-deployment information flow. My hands felt cold as I picked it up. With a deep breath, I tore it open and slid out the single sheet of paper inside. It was an executive directive, a kill order. For a moment, the words swam before my eyes, refusing to make sense. And then they did. The target code was my designation. The name read, Lieutenant Maya Hayden. The signature at the bottom, a near-perfect replica of my father's authoritative scrawl, read, Colonel R. Hayden. For a full 10 seconds, I couldn't breathe. A wave of ice washed through me, a visceral, crippling shock that threatened to pull me under. My father's name, my own name. Next to the word, eliminate. It was a violation so profound, so personal, it felt like a physical blow. But then, something else kicked in. Years of training, of discipline, of learning to wall off emotion in the face of a threat. A switch flipped in my mind. The grief and the shock were locked away in a box. This was no longer a family drama. This was an insider threat, an act of treason. And I was the target. My mind began to race, calculating variables, assessing risks. I couldn't just report it. To an outsider, I was a junior officer presenting an impossible document, an order signed by a dead man targeting his own daughter. I would be detained, questioned, probably sedated. I'd be labeled a flight risk, a security threat, and neutralized by the very system I served while my uncle's poison worked its way through the command structure. No, the only way to survive this was to dismantle it myself from the inside before the order went fully active. The signature. It was the key. My father, a man paranoid about digital security, had embedded a quantum, encrypted authentication key into his official command signature file. He called it the Hayden cipher, a digital ghost only he and I knew how to find. I moved to my ruggedized laptop, my fingers flying across the keyboard, my movements precise and automatic. I opened a covert communication channel, a black line of code visible only to one other person. My message was short, 3 words that carried the weight of life and death. Jax, I'm invoking Protocol Chimera. The protocol was a failsafe, a last resort for when the threat was coming from within our own walls. A long moment of silence stretched across the encrypted channel. Then, a single word appeared in response. Acknowledged. I typed out the instructions. Pull the source file for Directive 7 Alpha 3 from the deployment server and my father's official signature file from the Pentagon archives. I had a 90-minute window before the order was broadcast to an operational wetwork team. The clock was ticking. My uncle thought my father's name was a weapon he could wield. He was about to find out it was a shield. And I was standing right behind it. We convened in a secure, soundproof inquiry room, deep in the forward operating base. The air was cold and still, scrubbed of all scent and emotion. Commander Rostova sat at the head of a polished steel table, a picture of absolute authority. I stood to her right, my posture relaxed but ready. Across from me sat my uncle, Major Mark Hayden. He had arranged his face into a mask of solemn gravity, performing the role of a dutiful officer forced into a terrible, painful position. He thought he was in control. He believed he was the one who had set this trap. He had no idea he was the one who was about to be dissected. Commander Rostova began, her voice calm and even. With a flick of her finger, the forged order appeared on the large monitor at the front of the room, every word a calculated lie. Major Hayden, Rostova said, her eyes fixed on him. You brought this document to my attention. You claim this is a legitimate final order from your late brother, Colonel Robert Hayden. Mark met her gaze and nodded slowly. A perfect imitation of a man burdened by duty. It is my solemn duty to report it, Commander, no matter how painful the implications, he said, his voice laced with false regret. An order from a man like my brother. It has to be investigated. I watched him, and I saw every dismissive comment, every condescending pat on the head, every time he had ever made me feel small, all coalescing into this one final spectacular act of betrayal. The room was silent. He had said his piece. He thought the weight of my father's name was enough to crush me. Then I spoke. Commander, I said, my voice cutting cleanly through the tension. That document is a forgery. My uncle's head snapped towards me, a flicker of irritation in his eyes. He opened his mouth to object, but I didn't give him the chance. I gave a slight nod to the comms unit. Warrant Officer Jax, proceed. On a secondary screen, Jax's face appeared, his expression as impassive as ever, live from a server room stateside. Analyzing file metadata now, he stated, and lines of code began to stream next to the image of the order. The document was created 48 hours ago on a civilian terminal. The signature is a high-resolution scan, not a digital command signature. My uncle started to shift in his seat. This was not going according to his plan. Anyone could have. He started to say. I held up a hand, and he fell silent, stunned by my audacity. Jax, run the comparison, I ordered. On the screen, the scanned signature remained. Next to it, a new file loaded. Colonel Hayden's official digital signature from the Pentagon archives. As it materialized, a complex, glowing cryptographic key shimmered within it, a beautiful, intricate web of light. This, I explained to the room, my voice steady and clear, is the Hayden cipher. It's a quantum encryption key my father developed as a failsafe against digital forgery. A ghost in the machine. A key known only to him and to me. I looked directly at my uncle. The forgery doesn't have it. His face, which had been a mask of solemn duty, began to crumble. The blood drained from it, leaving behind a pasty gray pallor. This is absurd, he stammered, his voice suddenly thin. It must be a system error. I've been framed. Someone must have hacked. Jax's voice cut him off, cold and final. The file originated from a secure military network. We've traced the upload packet. It came from an IP address registered to Major Mark Hayden's personal residence. Checkmate. The finality of the statement was absolute, an electronic gavel coming down on his entire life. He stared at the screen, his mouth opening and closing silently, no words coming out. He was a man hollowed out in an instant, the arrogant shell of him collapsing inward. Commander Rostova looked at him, not with anger, but with a profound, icy contempt. Major, she said, her voice dripping with disdain, you tried to have a United States officer assassinated to cover up your own pathetic inadequacies and, I suspect, criminal activities we will now investigate with extreme prejudice. You are a disgrace to the uniform your brother honored. As if on cue, the door to the inquiry room opened, and two stone-faced military police officers stepped inside. They didn't look at me. Their eyes were locked on my uncle. He finally turned his gaze to me, and in his eyes I saw it all. The sputtering hatred, the shock, but underneath it all, a dawning, horrifying comprehension. For the first time in his life, he was truly seeing me. Not as his quiet, irrelevant niece, not as a footnote. He was seeing the master of a world he couldn't even comprehend. A world where his blustering authority meant nothing against cold, hard data. He finally understood who I was. For my entire life, he told me I was living in my father's shadow. He was right. It's where I learned how to hunt. After the military police led my uncle away, the inquiry room fell into a profound silence. The only sound was the quiet hum of the climate control system, circulating air that suddenly felt clean, breathable. Commander Rostova stood there for a long moment, her gaze fixed on the door that had just closed on my uncle's entire life. Then she turned to me. The hard, icy edge in her eyes was gone, replaced by something I had never seen from her before, a deep, unwavering respect. She looked at the screen, where the glowing, intricate pattern of my father's cipher was still displayed. "The Hayden cipher?" she said, her voice soft but clear. "He told me about it once, years ago. A theoretical failsafe. He said he created it for you." I must have looked surprised, because she offered a rare, small smile. His words were, "My daughter is the only one smart enough to ever use it, or break it." Her words landed with a weight I couldn't have anticipated. It wasn't just a compliment. It was a message, delivered across the years from a man I had idolized but never fully known. In that moment, I understood. My father hadn't just seen me as his daughter, he had seen me as his successor. The quiet legacy of his intellect, the part of him my uncle could never understand, had been his final gift to me. It was the ultimate validation, and it had been waiting for me all along. A year can change everything. It can dismantle a life built on lies and forge a new one from the hard, cold truth. 1 year later, I stood at the head of a briefing table in a state-of-the-art command center. The name on the door read, Captain M. Hayden. I was no longer a ghost, a lone operative hunting from the shadows. I was the commander of a new, elite unit born from the ashes of my uncle. Treason, the Insider Threat Task Force, code-named Task Force Chimera. My team, handpicked for their skill, their integrity, and their loyalty, looked to me for guidance. This was my new family, one forged not in blood and obligation, but in competence and trust. Across the table, Chief Warrant Officer 2 Jax gave me a subtle nod, his promotion a testament to his own brilliance. The easy camaraderie in the room, the shared sense of purpose, was something I had never experienced in my own home. Here, my authority wasn't questioned, it was relied upon. My expertise wasn't dismissed, it was the foundation of our entire mission. We were a unit dedicated to hunting for the enemy within our own walls, to ensuring that the shadows that had almost consumed me would never threaten anyone else. We were the guardians of the system's integrity, and it was a legacy I was building with my own 2 hands every single day. Late one night, in the quiet of my new office, a single email popped into my inbox. The sender was my mother. The subject line was just my name, Maya. For a long time, I just stared at it, a ghost from a life that felt a world away. My finger hovered over the delete button, but then, with a sigh, I opened it. The message was short, the words stripped of all their usual excuses. "They held the court-martial," she wrote. I read the testimony. "The cipher. It was for you. I was so wrong. I'm sorry." I read the words over and over. "I'm sorry." A decade earlier, those words would have been everything. I would have wept with relief, desperate for that acknowledgement. But now, I felt a strange and profound calm. The apology was a postscript to a story that had already ended. My peace was no longer a fragile thing dependent on her validation or anyone else's. It was a fortress I had built myself, brick by methodical brick. Her regret was hers to carry, not mine to absolve. With a quiet click, I moved the message to the archive folder, unanswered. My gaze drifted back to the wall of monitors in front of me, a global map of cascading data and potential threats. My focus was here now. My purpose was clear. My uncle tried to use my father's legacy to erase me. Instead, he forced me to finally claim it as my own. If you've ever had to fight a battle no one else could see, share your story in the comments below. In this community, your quiet strength is always recognized.